Sounds like Natter Splat, bitch.
Natter Splat.
Natter Splat.
Natter Splat.
Natter Splat. Natter Splat. Natter Splat.
Natter Splat.
Oh, yeah.
So I got a question for ya. Something's blowing up in British politics. And you're kind of into like old ancestry, how people moved, sort of races, civilizations. So my question is, does English exist as an ethnicity?
It's a very good question. I would say yes. Like, because ethnicity is important to people, but I do understand that it can be used in different ways in media and politics to be descriptive for things, and there's a misunderstanding to it, and I think that like you just have to draw the line with it sometimes. So, but to answer your question, yeah. English is an ethnicity to me, because like when I go to England, I feel like I see a lot of people that look alike and that share those things together, just like Ireland. Like there's certain places that you can go where they just have a look about them. So I would call those people English ethnically, personally. And then and I know the argument you're bringing up is what's his name?
David Lammy.
David Lammy. And like I don't have any prior knowledge about this guy, but from the one thing I did watch him talk about was about ethnicity and how he was claiming to be English, which I understand. And then there's
He's black, by the way.
Yeah, okay.
Afro-Caribbean. It's worth mentioning.
So first and foremost, we should just give a disclaimer to like English audiences specifically. A lot of English people, like American people, don't know the difference between English and British, and we get confused about it a lot, and like it's misused, and we don't know that there is a difference between British and English. So the difference between British and English is one is, well, better you say it, I guess.
Well, England is a country, as is Scotland and Wales, and they are countries. But on your passport, you are British if you come from the UK. Okay. So whether you're in Scotland, Wales, or England, or Northern Ireland, you are a British citizen.
United Kingdom,
and you can also say, as you know, Scottish people are going to say they're Scottish, and English people will say, I'm English, if you live in England. There's definitely more pride associated with Scotland and Ireland, especially. You know, English is seen as the British Empire. Sure. Because it was England. So there is a bit of a difference. And then, as I said, the British nationality is what takes it under the banner. So there are plenty of people saying, David Lammy, you are British. I have no problem with you being a British person, but to claim that your English is not true, English is an ethnicity, and that's the point the caller was trying to make to him. I agree with David Lammy in some respects, because if I met a black person, I said, where are you from? And he said, I'm English. I would have absolutely no problem with that, because he's telling me he's culturally English, he's British, and he lives in England, and he is more likely to be English in his mannerisms and preferences. The problem is when people start saying that English doesn't exist at all. You could go back a bit further and say, well, that's Anglo-Saxon, that's Norman.
Because the argument he was making was that like the Danes have settled there and this has settled there. But then I feel like that there could be a reasonable line drawn in the sense that, like, in the example that I brought up, like when there is a culture of people that's like a group of people that's been somewhere for so long that their genetics become so similar that they have created their own ethnicity per their area. So like there's different ethnic groups all over the place.
Well, of course, it wouldn't be unreasonable that American became an ethnicity, because The mix would, you know, with its different influences, would turn into a sort of unique attributes where, on average, the American DNA would be different to other places. And I think that's the case for Britain.
No, but I don't think America could become an ethnicity just for the simple fact that like it hasn't been established long enough and colonized long enough to get the individualism of that versus America does have a nationality, and like I feel like there's pride to be taken within that as well.
Well, it's it's multiracial in the sense that there's a higher ideal to strive towards. The Constitution's so important that you can strive towards that, and that's what defines your country more than anything.
Because like coming from America, like I wonder what my ethnicity would be because it comes from so many other places and it's been traveled and diluted that like, yeah, I would have a hard time answering that question myself.
Well,
like,
it's funny you said diluted there because the video in question, the lady caller towards the end complained that everywhere is polluting everywhere else. And I think I don't think that's a nice way of describing it. I think you can say diluted, and you can be neutral about that term and see positives and good and negatives. But she said polluted, which doesn't sound great. It was bad optics, and I think David Lammy did a really good job of talking and explaining. I just have some serious questions about his logic. If he wants to go down that line and say, I'm fully English, I am completely part of this society in that sense, that I'm not just British, I am English, and let's do away with anything about ethnicity. But he also asks for reparations for being black. You know, he wants reparations, and he said that. So
then he's not a good example of this. Like, it was interesting to like watch that video, and like I thought it would be an interesting topic to cover just because that is an interesting topic to cover is like what is ethnicity versus nationality versus there's different things that come into play depending on the area that you're in, because in America it's going to have a different idealism going on versus in the UK or different places. So
well, it's fundamentally different. I don't think when you're talking about this issue, you should compare the USA and Europe so much. They're so vastly different in their attitudes on so many different levels, I think. And whilst there are similarities, how people see this difference between black and white just seems way more under the magnifying glass in American culture. And in Britain, it was never so much, you know, the fact that people say African American, you know, but no one in England would say I'm black British. You know, they wouldn't say that. They might fill it in on a form if it asks them, you know, but they wouldn't say as this, you know, as a black British. It's just not as prevalent as African American, the distinction between and the idea of segregation, whether that be culturally instituted or socially happen on its own. There's more segregation in America, and there's more integration in Britain between black and white, particularly, and always has been. And it's very different attitude, and unfortunately, we're getting a lot of the nonsense from America now on British streets, and people are being racially radicalized. Yeah. All races.
And there isn't actually such a stigma.
There never used to be. I think we were getting towards a post-racial society, and we were getting told. I think everything was getting better, but then we were told things have never been worse.
Yeah.
Things have never been worse.
And I have a performer friend who's black, and he's from England, and I asked him, like, I brought it up to him, and I asked him, I was like, what is the difference? Because I have African American friends that can be very sensitive about the issue. Not to say that there's no reason to be. I'm just stating what it is. So they're very passionate and sensitive about these issues. And I had made the point to like one of my friends when he was out here. I was like, you know, out here you're just American. Like there's not that like separate, like out here, like everybody just looks at you as Americans. So it's not like that. And then I ended up asking one of my friends that lived out of the UK, and I asked him like, what is your interpretation on all of this? Because there is such a stigma in America with so many things. Like, what is it for you? And he's actually in an interracial marriage. So he's married to a white chick. And he said when they went on, he's like, in the UK, they never had a problem with anything. It was never a thing. Nobody ever labeled them as an interracial couple. He was like, until they went to America, and then like people tried to like seat them at different tables when they would go out to eat or this or that, or like they would assume that they weren't together, and they even got labeled a couple times when they were on their trip there, and they had never experienced anything like that until they went there, until like that was the first time they experienced the differential treatments of something like that. And it just shows you how big of a like polarizing difference there is from one place to another. And I think like in the UK, my interpretation on the situation at least is everything was fine out there. And like,
I mean, some people would object to saying everything was fine. I think there's always going to be cases of racial problems in whatever regard, but I think it really was. I really believe. I grew up. I remember talking to people, and I worked in working class jobs for years, talking to the people who you think are those white racist gammon. That's what they call them.
Okay.
Gammon. Yeah. British term. Do you know what it means? They call it like imagine like your angry right winger standing in the sun watching the football, so he's burned. He's got like a bit of red face and he's screaming just because he's so angry at hating anyone who isn't exactly like him, right?
Yeah.
Imagine that person. That's gammon. And then they call everyone gammon, you know? Where was I going with that? I got distracted. Where was I going? I've talked to a lot of working class people, the people who are castigated as that by the media and the society. And the truth is that they use language that is not woke and not PC, but they're just not racist. That they don't care. People don't judge people like that. They judge people for how they behave.
yeah.
And I mean,
you should hear like how my grandparents talk, but then like how they would treat somebody is completely like different to that. But it's just they come from a generation and a time and a place that you talk to, like they just have a particular lingo to things. So, but then like that by no means has any standing on how they would treat a human being. You know,
I was talking to a guy in a pub when I worked in the pub, and I think a terrorist attack had just happened. So he was talking about Muslims, but he said, "Listen." He said, "Listen here." He said, "I am not racist, right? I'm not racist. My best friend's a blackie."
Oh my God.
He said, "He's coming down in a bit." He said, "My best friend's a blackie." And like that language, it gets you cancelled, right? That gets you cancelled. But the point is, sure as day.
Sure as day.
But the point is, sure as day, a black guy came in and they had a beer. And it's like...
No, but see, people get so like hung up on language today, and like that's kind of fucking scary, because yeah, my grandparents come from a time and a place like you would the world cancel my grandparents? Probably. If they could, they probably would. No, but like it's just funny because it's the words that they use and it's the lingo that they use, but it's just that's what you like, how you talked or how it is, but it doesn't have any standing on how you feel unless it's standing on the other side. But usually I bet if his friend has no problem with him saying that about him, he's like, yeah, that's my buddy. That's how he talks. It's whatever. But now the fact that people are getting so sensitive about everything and this whole cancel culture, Me Too movement, that,
let's not get distracted.
Feelings about that.
I just wanted to get down to what you really thought about that, and you think that you can say you're English, and I think it's really, I imagine there's the sort of French still, but as the woman said, polluted. It's probably diluted. That's the way we're moving. There are fewer distinct ethnicities, let's say, and they're getting more and more similar, perhaps. But it seems like they're trying to erase that. That's what, like, I read the comments, and I've read a few pieces, people writing about this interview or this call, sorry. And it really feels like it's just, I don't think it's controversial what we've talked about here. I think we haven't said anything offensive. Like I said, I'll reiterate, if someone said I'm English.
No, it was just, that was like,
but
there was something that we were discussing today was ethnicity. And it was like, I asked if you wanted to, like, we didn't really prepare for this or anything. I just thought it would be an interesting topic to talk about because it has so much stigma around it, especially lately. And versus, I feel like you said, like there hasn't always been such a stigma around things. And like now it's just becoming more of a thing, and it's all about division and separating people and like
well, racial segregation is coming back, because when you see stores that say black owned, Hispanic owned, lots of people will choose that and say, great, I'll support that. But lots of people don't like being forced. Most people, I think, would just go to a different store. But if that happened more and more frequently, people who've never thought about the color of the person selling the rice now are forced to choose between black, Hispanic, or unlabeled. And maybe some white people will go, I'll get the unlabeled one. I didn't give a rat's ass. So when I see these pictures of stores, and few and far between, I think. I don't want to act like it's a huge thing, but just to say this is black. I feel like then
you're like then culture comes into play, and now you would choose one based off of like the culture's flavors from where they come from, which is their like ethnicity, which is their culture.
No, you're imagining like the foods of that, like Caribbean food, black owned. I mean, just imagine going for bread or milk, and one of the companies is ethnically owned or minority owned, so it has a label.
Yeah, there's a huge double standard out there right now.
Well, I just don't think it's healthy to ask people to make those sort of decisions when they're buying their groceries. You could have an ad campaign, I think, saying, hey, we're great and we're doing this, and people do that. They get personal connections with companies and consumer goods, but to have it in the store, make your choice now. Well, I'd like to know what my DNA is and what the DNA companies would say. I will never give them my DNA. They're not taking it. Of course not. I don't want them playing around with my DNA. But I would be interested to see what they would say I am, ethnically. And do they use the term English, or is there another term for people from the British Isles?
Because, then what makes you Swedish? Then what makes you Norwegian? Then what makes you English? So then you're just going to be like, that gets a little complicated, because to what end, a line needs to be drawn somewhere.
Well, in the census this year in the United Kingdom, I think they ask you what you more identify as. So, the typical options are going to be exactly what we talked about. Do you identify as English? Do you identify as British? Do you identify as European? And this is more about self-identity than any legal status. Mm-hmm. But it's about how if you're someone who travels a lot, maybe you don't have connections with home where you grew up. Maybe you never grew up in one place. Maybe you really do consider yourself European. Maybe that's the sort of thing. And I can see how that's a thing. It's just asking you your personal identity on that. And that's an interesting one. Do you say you're English? I think most people probably say they're British, except Scottish people who will say they're Scottish. Welsh people will say they're Welsh. Northern Irish people will say they're Northern Irish, I think, or Irish. Mm. English people, typically there's this idea that Englishness is connected to racism. So, in that sense, showing the British flag is fine, but showing the English flag has connotations. So people don't like, or some people don't like seeing, they associate it with nationalism, as in that being a bad thing. But the nationalism of Scotland and Wales
other nations are allowed to be proud. So
well, Scotland and Wales are allowed to have a lot of nationalism within the union.
But England just kind of gets the
people do. It's not against the law. It's just there's just a stigma that people don't do it. And
it's a double standard, and I feel like it's a double standard that's being created for people by the propaganda machine. And so much of this wouldn't be there unless it was fed to us, honestly.
Well, yeah, it's what is hyped,
Because, like, how we feel, like, in our hearts, despite whatever arguments people want to say and, like, telling me how I feel, I'm of the argument that people are good by nature and can be as long as they're led that way and not led down ugly, propagandized, socialized ways. So, because yeah, just like the hangings in the streets, and if you're gonna indoctrinate people with that from so long ago, like of course that's gonna be public shaming. Like that's part of the society that's being created, you know, versus.
Well, it's just another way to divide.
So that's why I just feel like it's been fed to us, and by nature, if we were to go with nature and follow our hearts and morals and have our moral compass guide us, it would be a lot different. And I feel like we've just been told that we can't be guided by our moral compass and that we can't take care of ourselves and control ourselves, but that's just an illusion. Like we are completely capable.
This
and
whole
functional
operation
of like we've built cities, we've done all of this on our own anyway without governance. So I'm just saying people are good by nature, and it's like it depends on where you lead people, and people need to be really wary about that, because I feel like a lot of people are being led in a certain way and like they're losing their connection with nature and their connection with their hearts and their souls and like how things can be versus how they are, if that makes sense.
I'm not sure it did.
I'm sure it did.
I'm not sure it did.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure it did.
Okay.
I'm unsure that it did.
Okay, got it. That's better. No, I just feel like it is like it.
This operation, listen to me.
There is division, but then like I feel like it's
Listen,
been, like,
this division began at around 10 years ago. There was a lot of social momentum moving, and it was going in a classically Marxist direction. It was kind of going towards Occupy Wall Street, crush the rich, decapitate the elite. It was going in that direction, and that was redirected, so all of that energy became racial energy. And from then, BLM came along. Very curious that they come up at election time. I'm not saying that's necessarily a link, but they really do become prominent in election years. As an aside. But this began to redirect the energy, I think, that was the anti-capitalist energy that was building because of a society that was starting to crack. So the newspapers and all the media began running stories about race, everything about race, and it began 2010, 2011. And if you look at the actual stats of certain phrases,
it's been about sales over actual accurate anything. You know, look at America. What was happening about Russia being in the media about everything, and like nothing was actually going on. So
4 years they talked about that.
Yeah, like, and from out here we're like, why is this? Russia and America aren't fighting. So it's just, it's like individualism.
The media machine, the propaganda.
So about ethnicity, I don't know. It's a complicated topic, and I think it is something that we like would be nice to have more open conversations about, because it is complicated, and it's not an easy thing to answer all the time. Because being an American, I don't necessarily even have my own ethnicity, because I'm a mix of a bunch of them, versus particular people that come from particular places that have a particular look to them, you know?
Well, I think you said it well when you said double standards. That's the problem that's happening. It's the double standards, because most people probably think it's not important. And all the people who get their DNA testing done, it's a bit of fun. And they really don't care.
And that's like super, by the way, like that's super like debunkable, and those like DNA tests are very flawed. And like there's been people that have gone to like multiple places, gotten tested at like 3 different places, and gotten 3 very different answers, or 3 pretty similar answers.
Right. I want to maybe speak in defense of that, though. I think the testing is still accurate, but it's their understanding of how genes interact with each other gets better. They update their things, so they're going to have different systems of modeling to get that. So in theory, you could get your DNA sequenced today, and then in years time, they might know more about you than they do today. So I think that's the thing. Okay. But what I mean is I don't think it's so important, but it's kind of making people think it's important, right? Mm-hmm. When you start questioning, like, if someone asked me what my ethnicity is,
I think it's important.
I wouldn't be able to answer them.
Because I don't even feel like I have one. So I feel like if you being English, I feel like that would be important to me. If I was English, I'd be like, yeah, I'm...
No, well, I am English. I would say I'm English ethnically, but because I haven't been tested and I don't know enough history, people, and it would be a good conversation. Oh, you came from the north, maybe you have some Scandinavian or Danish, and you'd be like, yep, there was different settlements. It's like, it's an interesting thing. Mm-hmm. But because we don't know, I would say I'm English. But now I think we're trying to get away that is an answer to that question. Or maybe actually it's not. Maybe the point is you're not supposed to ask that question if you're white. You don't need to know anything. But everyone else is allowed to sort of bind to that, to bind to their racial identity and feel a community in it, But obviously white people can't do that.
Publicly in the same way, like with the double standard of like black-owned bakery or whatever. So, because you would definitely never be able to put that the other way around.
Right, but the difference is, even if I lived in a country where white people were the minority, and I'd say people would say, well, you would have a white person club. That's no different, right? I think the difference is I wouldn't hang around with people just because they're white. That's for sure. And if there was
only be if you have things in common with
them.
them.
The common theme was we are living in a foreign country, we have different problems to native people here, and therefore we help each other out. And that's a little community that you could say is formed, but it's certainly not based on race. And you know what I mean? I wouldn't be interested in being like, hey, you're white.
Yeah.
Like,
oh my God.
I'm more selective than that. You know what I mean? I'm a little more selective.
So then is ethnicity something that's going to be lost to the world soon?
No, not soon.
Well, at some point.
I mean, it's... No, not fully.
Okay.
I think that would be almost impossible. It depends. Actually, it depends. A current population, no. But if you wiped out most of the population,
if you
maybe.
moved to Spain and you've had a couple generations in Spain, then you're probably just Spanish. But I guess it depends on where you come from and how you're going to identify. This is a really complicated topic.
Yeah, and we're already slurring our words today, I think.
No.
I think I am.
Why?
I don't know. What did you put in my wine?
I didn't.
Did you roofie me? Again?
No.
I hated it last time.
It would be a lot more fun than that if I did it. It would be like psychedelic.
Disavow. Disavow.
So how do you want to wrap this up?
How do we
Wow,
wrap this
yours
up?
got really red.
Okay. I haven't got too much to say bad about David Lammy. I think he handled the call really well. He didn't really say anything I object to other than his claim to having Scottish DNA, which I find a little ridiculous if he's saying that he's English and his caller is saying that he isn't English because of his DNA. His argument rests on that surely it isn't what's in his DNA, but then he goes on to say that he has been tested and has Scottish DNA. He has some part of Scottish. So he understands that Scottish is an ethnicity. Otherwise, it would be untraceable. But he understands that Scottish as an ethnicity is in his blood and in his bloodline and in his DNA, which I think strengthens the caller's argument. Surely, that there's some genetic component. I don't know. It was an interesting call because I think it's one of those things that's going to set off some kind of, I don't want to say national debate because it won't be that, but it will be some people getting pilloried for saying, let's say, objective truth or very uncontroversial statements. I think that's what's going to happen from it, but that's not to say anything bad in particular about him. I think he spoke well, as you said. I think he did.
No, it's just nice to have a conversation about it because we don't have all the answers and there is a lot of things to figure out. So let's get it started here on Nattersflat.
That's how we are now. Tune in next week for more Natter Splat. Yeah, I'm not doing that. See you later.
Bye.
If you made it through an entire episode of Nattersplat, well done you. You can find more of us all over the internet and at nattersplat.com. See you later.